In the heart of a sleek, high-tech alien research station, alarms blared. The station's top engineers, members of the technologically supreme Galactic Federation, rushed about, their tentacles and appendages darting over control panels as they scrambled to stabilize the station's failing quantum reactor. They were the best minds in the galaxy, but even they were stumped. The entire sector risked annihilation, and they had mere moments left to act. Enter an unassuming human technician from Earth, pulled in from a nearby survey ship. She strolled in with a calm smile, casually sipping her coffee, seemingly unfazed by the chaos. The alien scoffed, openly doubtful about her ability to help with something as intricate as a quantum reactor malfunction. "Anyone have a hairpin?" she asked casually, scanning her surroundings. The aliens looked at her, bewildered. A hairpin? Surely that couldn't possibly solve their crisis. But as she slid the pin from her pocket and got to work, the aliens watched with wide eyes, both curious and confused. Imagine yourself in that situation, the fate of an entire galactic sector resting on a humble hairpin in the hands of a human. What would you do? Leave a comment below if you'd trust a human in this scenario, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of human ingenuity in the face of the impossible. In the sterile, silver-toned hallways of the Galactic Federation Research Station, a serious meeting was underway. The best scientists and engineers from dozens of star systems gathered around a holographic display, each one deeply engrossed in the figures and diagrams projected before them. The stakes were high. The station's quantum reactor, a marvel of intergalactic engineering, was malfunctioning. If it failed, the resulting explosion would obliterate not only the station, but an entire sector of valuable research colonies. The aliens took turns discussing the issue, their voices filled with confidence and pride. They were certain that with their advanced technology and strict protocols, they could solve any problem. After all, they were the Galactic Federation. But as the minutes ticked by, their confidence began to waver. Each solution they proposed seemed to lead to a dead end, and the timer on the reactor's core warning display kept ticking down, mocking their desperation. At that moment, they received word that a human technician had arrived. A human? The gathered aliens exchanged puzzled glances. Surely a primitive human wouldn't be able to assist with something as advanced as a quantum reactor. Some even chuckled softly, imagining what bizarre tools a human might bring. "Have you heard?" murmured one engineer to another, his frills quivering with barely suppressed amusement. "Humans have a tool they call duct tape. They use it to fix everything." Another engineer joined in, snickering. "I read that they rely on caffeine to stay alert. They drink it daily. Something called coffee? Imagine that, depending on a beverage to function." The laughter spread, each alien adding a new odd fact about humans. "They're surprisingly resilient for such a fragile species. I heard they'll attempt to repair anything, even if it's hopeless. They call it just giving it a try." "Ridiculous, isn't it?" A senior engineer raised a tentacle to silence them. "Enough. They may be an unusual species, but they have a peculiar knack for survival. I've seen a human rig together a broken engine using a rubber band and a paperclip. Let's at least see what this one has to offer." With a nod of reluctant agreement, they waited as the human entered the room. She appeared relaxed, hands in her pockets, a smile on her face, and, most bewildering of all, a cup of coffee in her hand. She took a sip, glanced at the serious, anxious faces around her, and then at the display of the reactor's rapidly declining status. "All right," she said, her voice calm. "What seems to be the problem?" The aliens exchanged incredulous glances, unused to such a casual tone in a situation of this gravity. One of them cleared his throat, tentatively speaking up. "The reactor is experiencing a catastrophic failure. The containment field is on the verge of collapse, and our attempts at stabilizing it have failed." The human nodded thoughtfully, studying the display with a practiced eye. She didn't panic or immediately start suggesting grandiose solutions. She simply took another sip of coffee and looked around. "Do you have anything like a hairpin?" she asked. The room fell silent. A hairpin? Was she serious? The lead engineer couldn't hide his exasperation. "A hairpin? You intend to solve a quantum reactor malfunction with a hairpin?" She shrugged. "Hey, a hairpin and a little ingenuity can go a long way." Sometimes the simple solution is the best one. The aliens looked at each other in disbelief, murmuring their doubts. They had gathered here with their most complex solutions, debating the intricacies of particle physics and containment theory. And here was this human, holding a cup of coffee and suggesting a hairpin. Curious to see where this could possibly lead, the head engineer sighed and motioned for her to proceed. The other engineers watched with thinly veiled amusement, some even making notes about human improvisation in their data pads. They were certain this would be a short-lived exercise in futility. As the human technician approached the reactor's control panel, she took out her hairpin, straightening it with a quick flick. The aliens watched, one of them muttering to another, "I have to see this." At this point, pause and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think she'll succeed? And if you're enjoying this insight into alien reactions to human ingenuity, don't forget to subscribe for more. With her hairpin in hand, the human technician approached the reactor's control panel, which was a complex array of lights, buttons, and alien glyphs. The myriad of colors flashing indicated various alarms, warnings, and critical systems in distress. It was a chaotic tableau, but she remained unfazed, her brow furrowing only slightly in concentration. The alien engineers stood back, arms crossed, their skepticism palpable. One alien with a particularly elaborate head crest leaned closer to a colleague. "This is ridiculous. She believes she can simply poke at things with a hairpin and save us? What next? Shall we hand her a rubber band and see if she can fix our warp drives? Perhaps we should have invited a qualified engineer instead of a maintenance technician." Another alien chimed in, smirking. The atmosphere was thick with condescension as they watched her begin to fiddle with the panel. "Let's see what she does," murmured the head engineer, his interest piqued despite his better judgment. He had heard of humans' reputation for unconventional thinking and problem-solving, albeit in less critical scenarios. Perhaps there was something to learn here, albeit, he hoped not, at the cost of their station. "First," the human said, glancing over her shoulder, "I need to know which component is causing the failure. Can you tell me what this system does?" The aliens looked at each other, bewildered by her directness. One of them pointed to a series of diagrams on a nearby screen. "That section controls the quantum containment field. It's responsible for stabilizing the core reactions." "Great," she replied, her eyes lighting up. "Now, let's take a look at what's going wrong." She leaned closer to the panel, inspecting the wiring and blinking lights. "You said it was failing, so what's the backup system?" The aliens exchanged confused glances again. They had been so focused on their intricate protocols and complicated systems that they hadn't even considered a backup. "Backup," one finally stammered. We thought we could fix it with our current systems." "Right," she nodded, her voice encouraging. "Okay, what do you have in the way of emergency protocols?" One engineer finally spoke up, flustered. "We have protocols, yes, but they involve complex calculations and recalibrations. They require time we do not have. Sometimes the best solution is to get creative," she said, her tone light. "Let's see what happens when we go off script. I'll need that hairpin, a rubber band if you have one, and what else do you have around here? Any random tools?" The aliens exchanged glances again, half confused and half incredulous. "A rubber band? How is that going to help?" As she began to reach for various tools on the bench, she explained, "I once fixed a malfunctioning machine using a rubber band and a spoon. Trust me, we can get this done." Their skepticism was beginning to waver as they watched her confidence. The human's reputation for resilience and ingenuity was known throughout the galaxy, but to see it firsthand was an entirely different experience. Slowly, the aliens gathered tools from their nearby workbenches, watching with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "What is your plan?" asked the head engineer, a hint of concern breaking through his facade of superiority. "Honestly, I'm just going to improvise. Let's see where it takes us," she replied with a grin. "Keep an eye on that reactor. We need to be ready to act fast if anything goes sideways." The aliens were momentarily struck dumb. They had always relied on calculated precision and controlled measures, yet here was a human, unfazed by the danger, suggesting an ad-lib approach. A few of the engineers began to whisper to one another, exchanging thoughts on the absurdity of the situation. "Can you believe this? She's not even worried." One engineer laughed nervously. At least we won't have to worry about it being boring. The lead engineer struggled to maintain his composure. Focus. We must ensure she understands the risks. Meanwhile, the human had begun to attach the rubber band to several exposed wires. If I can redirect the energy flow here, she explained, it might stabilize the containment field long enough for us to recalibrate the reactor safely. The aliens exchanged incredulous looks. They had always adhered to the most complex of designs, and had never considered that a simple solution might actually exist. This woman was throwing away all their norms and procedures, yet somehow they were intrigued. "Watch closely," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I might be about to break every rule in your handbook, and it could save us all." The engineers leaned in, their disbelief giving way to a shared sense of urgency. "This is absurd," one muttered under his breath, but even he couldn't help but watch her work with rapt attention. As she continued to manipulate the components, she turned to them and asked, "Ever faced a problem that seemed impossible? What did you do? Comment below with your craziest fix." The aliens stared at her, baffled but intrigued. The absurdity of the situation was beginning to dawn on them. Here was a human, relaxed and seemingly enjoying herself, while they struggled with the very real possibility of catastrophe. The tension in the room shifted as they found themselves rooting for her success. "Perhaps there's something to this improvisation," one alien whispered, his tone more contemplative now. The head engineer remained skeptical, but began to realize that perhaps there was more to the human perspective than he had previously thought. After all, they had spent so long adhering to the rules that they had forgotten how to think outside the box. As the human technician continued working, something unexpected happened. The reactor emitted a loud hum, and the control panel light shifted from red to yellow. The aliens stared, wide-eyed, as their complex containment field showed slight stabilization. For the first time in hours, they felt a flicker of hope. But the reprieve was short-lived. A sudden surge in the reactor's energy levels caused an entire section of the station's lights to flicker and go out. Emergency sirens blared, signaling a secondary system failure. The aliens gasped, scrambling to their stations to assess the new damage. Their carefully managed protocols were unraveling, and chaos was creeping in. The human technician just sighed, shook her head and muttered, "Of course, why wouldn't there be more problems?" One of the aliens, now thoroughly alarmed, approached her. "We have a coolant leak in the primary reactor conduit. If we don't fix it immediately, the entire system will overheat and trigger a meltdown." The technician raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "All right, what's our backup plan?" A chorus of puzzled stares answered her. The aliens hadn't prepared for this scenario. There was no protocol, no pre-planned solution. They had placed all their faith in the primary system's infallibility. Backups to them were unnecessary. The technician let out a low chuckle, shaking her head in amused disbelief. "You guys really don't do backups, huh?" The lead engineer, flustered, responded, "Our systems are designed to operate perfectly. Redundancies are inefficient." "Not in my world," she replied, a hint of sarcasm in her tone. "Where I come from, things break, a lot, so we always plan for failure." She rummaged through a toolkit, pulling out a roll of electrical tape and a few other odds and ends. "Now, let's improvise." With that, she swiftly began taping up a makeshift seal on the coolant conduit. She paused for a moment, seemingly deep in thought, and then attached a clamp to reinforce the patch. "This isn't pretty, but it'll buy us some time." The aliens watched in a mix of horror and awe as she calmly rigged together solutions using what they considered to be laughably primitive tools. One engineer shook his head in disbelief. You're taping the coolant line?" "Yep," she answered unapologetically. "We need a quick fix to keep it from overheating. You can go back and make it look all fancy later." "Fancy? This is a delicate reactor system. How can you treat it so casually?" "Trust me," she replied with a smirk. "Casual can be effective. Now let's keep moving. This reactor's not going to stabilize itself." Just as she finished securing the coolant line, another warning siren blared, this time from the reactor's power distribution grid. Apparently, the temporary patch had rerouted more energy than the system could handle, causing a buildup in another part of the station. One alien engineer started to panic, waving his appendages frantically. "This is it. We're out of options. The reactor's going to cascade into a full overload." But the human technician simply held up a hand, motioning for calm. "Relax," she said. "I've got a plan. Again." The alien team exchanged bewildered glances. How could she remain so composed when everything was clearly falling apart? "You know," she remarked, half to herself, "back on Earth we have a saying, when in doubt, cut the power. Sometimes you've just got to let a system reset itself." Their head engineer scoffed, visibly agitated. "Cut the power? Do you have any idea what that would do to the entire station?" She shrugged. "Look, if we keep pushing these failing systems, they're all going to collapse anyway. Better to do a controlled reset now and manage the damage." The aliens stared, uncertain. This was unheard of, a concept so foreign to their meticulously organized minds that they struggled to process it. One engineer finally ventured, "Are you suggesting we disable the reactor's primary grid?" "Yes," she replied confidently. "It'll be risky, but if we can restart from scratch, we might be able to stabilize it." After a tense pause, the head engineer nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Begin the reset." With one final look around the room, she took a deep breath and pulled the main power override. The hum of the reactor faded, plunging the room into an eerie silence. For a brief moment, every alien held their breath, eyes wide as they waited for the aftermath. Then, slowly, the lights began to return. The control panel blinked back on, its readings more stable than before. It seemed her risky maneuver had paid off, at least for the moment. The aliens began to mutter in astonishment, staring at the human technician as if seeing her in a new light. "That actually worked," one engineer murmured, almost in disbelief. The technician grinned, wiping her brow. "Told you. Sometimes you've got to take a leap of faith." But just as she was starting to celebrate, another alarm went off. This time, it was the reactor core's ventilation system. With all the rerouted power, the ventilation system had been overtaxed and was now beginning to overheat. One alien's composure finally broke. "This is madness. Every time we solve one problem, another appears. We're doomed." The technician sighed, but her eyes remained bright and focused. "Not doomed, just challenged, and I like a good challenge." Without missing a beat, she dove back in, quickly assessing the ventilation system. She glanced back at the engineers, gesturing for them to join her. "All right, folks, time to get creative. Grab whatever you can find, wrenches, clamps, even spare cables. We're going to jerry-rig this until it holds." The aliens hesitated for a moment before slowly picking up the tools she suggested. As they worked alongside her, the energy in the room shifted. For the first time, they felt like they were actively contributing rather than simply observing. The humans' improvised approach was infectious, and they began to share ideas and solutions with each other, building on her instructions. As they worked together, the technician turned to the camera with a grin. "Ever had to solve one problem after another non-stop? Hit that like button if you know the struggle." With a final twist of a bolt and a quick patch of tape, they managed to stabilize the ventilation system. The room filled with an odd sense of relief and triumph as the alarms finally went silent. The human technician leaned back, taking a satisfied breath. The lead engineer looked at her, speechless for a moment, before finally managing to say, You have saved us. I didn't think it was possible." She shrugged with a smirk. "All in a day's work. Next time, consider a backup plan or two, and maybe keep some duct tape on hand. It works wonders." The aliens exchanged glances, suddenly aware of how differently they had approached the crisis. Their respect for the human technician had grown, even if they didn't fully understand her methods. "Perhaps we underestimated your methods," one alien admitted, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Your way is strange but effective." "Strange, maybe," she replied, laughing. "But sometimes, strange is exactly what you need." As the final alarms faded and the reactor settled into a steady hum, the room fell into an almost reverent silence. The alien engineers stood in awe, watching as the human technician dusted off her hands and took a long, satisfied sip of her coffee. She didn't seem fazed by the monumental crisis she had just averted or by the unconventional means she'd used to solve it. To her, this was just another day on the job. One of the younger alien engineers turned to the head engineer, his voice trembling slightly. How? How did she do that? None of our protocols, our technology, our planning could fix it. She used ordinary tools and improvised. The head engineer, who had been so skeptical moments earlier, seemed equally speechless. He finally managed to respond, though his voice was quieter than usual. I don't know. It defies everything we've been trained to believe. She disregarded protocols and logical procedures, yet she saved us. Another alien, a senior technician known for his adherence to rules, shook his head slowly. Is it possible that we've been going about this all wrong? Our entire engineering philosophy is built on precision, planning, and control. We design everything to avoid chaos, but she embraces it. They watched as the human technician casually packed away her hairpin, rubber band, and the rest of her tools. She was clearly proud of the work they had all done, yet she didn't seem to view it as anything extraordinary. The aliens found themselves questioning everything they had previously thought about humans, problem-solving, and even their own society. The head engineer spoke up, almost to himself. Humans, they adapt to chaos. They make do with what they have. Maybe that's why they thrive in ways we can't comprehend. One alien, visibly frustrated, interjected. But how can they survive like that? Without structure, without planning for every eventuality. The human technician, overhearing, smirked and said, We survive because we don't expect everything to go right. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that things break, plans fail, and sometimes you've got to wing it. The alien engineers looked at each other, grappling with a growing existential crisis. For so long they had relied on meticulously planned systems, convinced that order and control were the only ways to avoid disaster. But here was this human, who had just saved their station with a hairpin, tape, and sheer grit. One of them hesitated, then asked, Do humans really live with this unpredictability every day? She chuckled. Oh yeah, that's just part of the package. If you don't learn to handle it, you're going to have a rough time. The universe doesn't care about our plans. A murmur of contemplation rippled through the aliens. For beings who had dedicated their lives to eliminating risk and maintaining control, this concept was as foreign as the stars. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that maybe, just maybe, they had been missing something fundamental. Perhaps, the head engineer said slowly, his voice tinged with awe, perhaps we could learn something from you. The technician grinned. Hey, I'm always happy to share a little Earth wisdom. Rule number 1, sometimes you just have to get your hands dirty and hope for the best. The aliens pondered this, some of them visibly shaken. One of the more philosophical engineers muttered, Is it possible that we've been striving for an impossible ideal? Perhaps by trying to eliminate chaos, we've lost the ability to respond to it. The technician's words had sparked a deep, almost uncomfortable realization among them. Their society, so focused on precision and perfection, had missed out on the resilience and adaptability that came from dealing with chaos and failure. She shrugged, clearly enjoying their reaction. Look, I'm not saying you should ditch all your protocols, but maybe throw in a little flexibility. Sometimes you have to think on your feet and make the best of what you've got. One of the engineers, who had been fervently taking notes throughout the ordeal, raised a tentacle and asked, Do you think this adaptability is what makes humans so resilient? She considered this, then nodded. I think it's part of it. We don't shy away from problems. We tackle them head on. And sometimes, when things get really bad, we just laugh, grab a roll of duct tape, and get to work. The aliens exchanged glances, each processing this revelation in their own way. The lead engineer, who had initially dismissed her methods, now seemed deep in thought. Maybe we've spent too much time focusing on control, he said softly, and not enough on the ability to adapt. As if reading their collective thoughts, the human technician added, Life's unpredictable, and sometimes all the planning in the universe won't prepare you for what's around the corner. That's why humans don't worry too much about the right way. We find a way, and that's what matters. For the aliens, these words felt like a philosophical earthquake. Their view of humanity had shifted from skepticism to awe and they found themselves respecting the human's capacity for resilience and creativity. This human, with her simple tools and laid-back attitude, had redefined what they thought was possible. In the midst of their contemplation, she leaned in and whispered, "Next time, keep a few humans around. You never know when you might need someone to break a few rules." The head engineer managed to smile, a rare and genuine expression for his usually stern face. "Perhaps we will, and we'll make sure to keep a stock of coffee and hairpins." She laughed, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. "Now you're talking. You're going to need that caffeine if you ever want to keep up with us." As she packed up to leave, the aliens found themselves watching her with a newfound respect and curiosity. She represented something they didn't fully understand, but were increasingly drawn to. In a way, she had sparked a quiet revolution in their minds, challenging them to consider a different approach. They knew that after this, their procedures and protocols would undergo serious reevaluation. Some were already jotting down ideas for emergency improvisation training and creative problem-solving workshops, inspired by their unexpected encounter with a human's unique way of tackling problems. As she made her way to the exit, one of the younger engineers called out, "Will we see you again?" She paused, looking back with a grin. "You can count on it. Just remember to have the coffee ready and maybe a roll of duct tape." The head engineer, looking after her thoughtfully, murmured, "Perhaps this is the beginning of a new chapter for us, the Galactic Federation and humanity working together." With that, she disappeared through the doors, leaving behind a roomful of aliens grappling with new perspectives and a shared sense of wonder. The human technician had barely left the control room when yet another alarm blared, echoing through the station. The aliens jolted, exchanging anxious glances as the station's main console displayed a new, dire warning. It seemed the reactor's cooling system, heavily taxed by the recent emergency, was now on the verge of collapse. Without immediate intervention, the reactor could still overheat, nullifying all of their efforts so far. Hearing the alarm, the human technician poked her head back in, visibly unfazed by the fresh chaos. "I take it you need a little more help?" she asked with a grin. The lead engineer nodded, his previous skepticism now replaced by genuine relief at her return. We would be grateful for any assistance you can provide," he admitted, the humility clear in his voice. She gave a quick nod, already surveying the new crisis. "All right, cooling system's about to fail. That's not ideal." She glanced around, assessing their resources. "Let's go full-on improvised engineering here. Anyone have access to the water purification system?" An alien engineer raised a tentacle. "Yes, but what does that have to do with cooling the reactor?" "Just trust me on this," she replied, her tone brisk but confident. "I need you to start rerouting the water from that system to the reactor's coolant pipes. It won't be as efficient, but it'll cool things down just enough to buy us more time." The alien hesitated, then nodded, impressed by the boldness of her plan. As he worked to adjust the water flow, she turned to another group of engineers, pointing at some metal piping nearby. "All right, team, I need a couple of you to grab those pipes and help me rig a temporary radiator. We're going to pull the heat off the system manually. It'll be basic, but it'll work." The aliens moved quickly, scrambling to assemble the materials she'd pointed out. They were well aware that this was not their usual approach. Every fiber of their being wanted to follow protocol, but they had come to realize that her unconventional methods had merit. One by one, they followed her instructions, adjusting pipes and redirecting energy as she directed. As the improvised cooling setup began to take shape, the human technician called out, "All right, this is the critical part. We're going to need to push excess heat out of the station's ventilation system. But fair warning, it's going to get toasty in here." The head engineer raised a brow, his earlier skepticism gone. "Are you certain this will work?" "Nope," she admitted with a laugh, "but I'm willing to give it a try. Sometimes you've just got to take a calculated risk and hope for the best." Her confidence was infectious, and despite the rising temperature in the room, the alien engineers found themselves nodding along. Following her lead, they initiated the heat dispersal process, diverting as much thermal energy as possible through the makeshift radiator and out of the ventilation system. As they worked together, the human technician turned to the audience again, smiling. If you think we're going to pull off another crazy save, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of humans handling the impossible. As if in response to her words, the room's temperature began to drop. The makeshift cooling system was holding, at least for now. The reactor's stability indicator shifted from red to yellow, then to a cautious green. The aliens released a collective sigh of relief, and some even allowed themselves smiles of admiration. They had survived yet another close call, thanks to the humans' quick thinking. But just as they thought the crisis was finally over, the main console emitted another warning. This time, it wasn't a failure within the reactor itself, but rather a structural issue. The stress from the previous malfunctions had compromised part of the reactor's outer shell, and now the hull integrity of the entire station was at risk. One alien engineer groaned in despair. "This is hopeless. If the hull fails, it doesn't matter if we stabilize the reactor. We'll all be sucked into space." The human technician looked around, unfazed. "Then we don't let the hull fail. All right, last push. We've got this." Her unbreakable optimism sparked a new wave of determination among the alien engineers. One alien, who had been visibly doubtful since the beginning, finally spoke up. "What do we need to do?" "Simple," she replied, grabbing a sealing compound from a nearby toolbox. "We're going to patch the compromised sections. It's going to be messy, and it's definitely temporary. But it'll hold long enough for us to get proper repairs done." She divided the team into groups, assigning each one a different section of the hull to reinforce. With sealing compound, clamps, and even strips of metal scavenged from other parts of the station, they got to work patching up every crack and weakened joint they could find. As the human technician slapped another patch onto a particularly large breach, one alien couldn't help but marvel. "You humans, you seem to always have a solution, no matter how dire the situation." She grinned, shrugging. "It's not that we always have a solution, we just don't like giving up. When the going gets tough, we get creative." One of the aliens, deeply inspired by her resolve, asked, "Is that why humans are known to survive where others might not?" "Pretty much," she answered with a chuckle. "We don't mind getting a little messy if it means coming out the other side. And hey, it's all part of the fun, right?" As the last patch was secured, the final alarms died down. The alien engineers looked around, their eyes wide with amazement. They had survived a chain of disasters that should have been impossible to overcome, and it was all thanks to the humans' quick thinking and refusal to surrender. The head engineer, deeply humbled, approached her. "Thank you. I don't know if words are sufficient, but you have saved us all. You have shown us a way of thinking that we could never have imagined." She looked at him, smiling warmly. "Hey, you guys helped too. You adapted, and that's what counts. Sometimes it's less about the tools and more about the attitude." The entire team, once so resistant to her methods, now looked at her with newfound admiration and respect. They had not only survived the crisis, but had also learned a valuable lesson in adaptability and resilience. The technician took a step back, her work done, and addressed the room one final time. "Well, folks, I think it's safe to say that we've all earned a little break. And remember, don't let anyone tell you that a bit of duct tape and creativity can't save the day." With that, she gave a friendly salute, and the aliens broke into applause, a rare and heartfelt expression of their gratitude. They knew that this experience would be one they'd remember forever, and it would change the way they approached engineering, risk, and even their understanding of resilience. As she prepared to leave, the head engineer cleared his throat. "If you don't mind, we would be honored if you would stay and help us improve our systems. It seems we have a great deal to learn." She smiled, holding up her coffee cup. "I'd be happy to stick around. Just make sure the coffee keeps coming." With the crisis finally over, the alien engineers gathered around the human technician, who was now relaxing with a well-deserved sip of her coffee. The room, which had been filled with alarms and chaos just moments ago, was now quiet, the hum of the reactor a steady reminder of their collective victory. The alien engineers, once skeptical and bemused, now looked at her with respect and a bit of awe. One of the younger engineers, who had been taking notes the entire time, stepped forward tentatively. I didn't understand your methods at first. I thought you were careless, but now I realize I had much to learn." The technician offered him a warm smile. Hey, don't sweat it. You all did great. Sometimes you've just got to break out of the mold and get a little creative. The head engineer cleared his throat, a solemn look in his eyes. We owe you a debt, human. You've shown us a different way, a way we had dismissed for far too long. We were limited by our own perfectionism, by our obsession with control. He paused, glancing at his team. But you taught us that sometimes survival isn't about having everything perfectly planned. It's about adapting, about working with what you have. The human technician raised her cup in a friendly toast. That's the spirit. It's about finding a way, even when things look hopeless. And sometimes the best solutions aren't the fanciest. Sometimes they're just a little bit of tape, a coffee break, and a whole lot of stubbornness. The aliens exchanged glances, absorbing her words. For so long, they had lived by rigid protocols, designed their systems to avoid failure, and held themselves to standards of absolute precision. But this experience had shown them a different path, one where creativity and adaptability could coexist with logic and discipline. One of the engineers, his voice filled with genuine admiration, asked, "How did you humans learn to embrace chaos?" She chuckled. "Oh, it's just part of our nature. We live in a pretty unpredictable world, so we've learned not to get too comfortable with order. Things break, life happens, and sometimes all you can do is grab whatever's nearby and make it work." The younger engineer, who had been scribbling notes furiously, raised a tentative hand. "Do you think you could teach us? Perhaps we could adopt some of these methods in our future training." She smiled, nodding. "Of course, I'd be happy to. Just remember, the first rule is to stay calm. Panic is your worst enemy. The second rule, don't be afraid to try something that seems a little crazy." The aliens murmured among themselves, clearly intrigued by the idea. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing possibilities they had never before considered. They were beginning to see that perhaps their relentless pursuit of perfection had been holding them back. The head engineer looked at her with a newfound sense of respect. "You've given us more than just survival. You've given us a new perspective, a way to approach problems that we had overlooked." She shrugged, her eyes twinkling with humor. "Well, that's what we humans do. We don't give up easily, and we're pretty stubborn about finding solutions. And hey, if all else fails, duct tape." They all shared a laugh, the tension from the crisis now fully dissipated. For the first time, the aliens were beginning to see the value in the human approach, a blend of resilience, flexibility, and sheer determination that had saved them all. One of the more senior engineers, still visibly humbled, turned to his colleagues. "Perhaps it's time we rethink some of our protocols. Maybe we can introduce a human solutions training module to prepare ourselves for less conventional approaches." The technician grinned, raising her cup in a mock toast. "Here's to that. And hey, I'll even throw in a few tips on coffee making. Trust me, it'll keep you going when things get rough." The aliens, despite their typically formal demeanor, couldn't help but laugh along with her. The human had not only saved them, but had also brought a warmth and humor that had changed the atmosphere of their station. She had reminded them that, in the face of adversity, sometimes a little levity and a lot of coffee was all you needed. As they wrapped up, the head engineer gave her one last respectful nod. "Thank you. We will not forget this experience. You have left an indelible mark on our station and on our understanding of resilience." She responded with a casual salute. "Anytime. Just give me a call if you ever need a little human improvisation again." The group of aliens watched as she made her way toward the exit, each of them feeling a deep sense of gratitude and inspiration. They had survived, yes, but more than that, they had learned something valuable, a lesson they would carry forward, not just in their protocols, but in their understanding of life itself. And as she left, one alien quietly remarked to another, "Next time, and let's make sure to stock up on duct tape and coffee. I have a feeling we're going to need it." They all nodded, smiling, already planning ways to incorporate her teachings into their once rigid systems. Months later, in the polished corridors of the Galactic Federation's headquarters, the head engineer from the crisis-worn research station found himself at the center of a critical council meeting. The council members, representing various advanced civilizations, listened intently as he presented a revolutionary proposal inspired by a very unconventional encounter. "We propose to introduce a new program," he began, his voice carrying a rare mix of excitement and humility. "It is called the Human Solutions Protocol. It will focus on creative problem-solving, adaptability, and the use of unconventional tools and methods, as demonstrated by our recent encounter with a human technician." The council members exchanged curious looks. The Galactic Federation had always prided itself on meticulous procedures, refined technologies, and absolute control. The idea of incorporating human solutions, improvised, imperfect, often chaotic, was, to say the least, unprecedented. One council member leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Are you suggesting that we abandon our carefully established protocols?" "Not abandon," he clarified, a smile hinting at his newfound understanding. "But perhaps supplement them. The human approach is not about dismissing control. It's about embracing flexibility when things go awry. We witnessed it firsthand. A human saved our station using nothing more than a hairpin, a rubber band, and some duct tape." There was a murmur around the table, a mixture of surprise and intrigue. The head engineer continued, his tone earnest. "This human did not rely on perfect tools or flawless calculations. She relied on ingenuity and a refusal to accept defeat, even in the face of overwhelming odds. We learned that sometimes resilience is just as important as preparation." A silence fell over the council, the gravity of his words sinking in. It was clear that this encounter had not only changed him, but was now rippling outward, challenging the very foundation of their methods. After a moment, a senior council member nodded thoughtfully. "Very well. Let us implement a trial program. We will introduce human-inspired problem-solving training and explore the use of basic, versatile tools in emergency scenarios. It may be unorthodox, but perhaps this will prepare us for the unexpected." The head engineer felt a sense of pride swell within him. "Thank you. And perhaps, should any particularly challenging situations arise, we should consider inviting a human directly. Their expertise, it seems, goes beyond technology. It's a mindset." The council agreed, drafting the first Galactic Federation directive to actively study and incorporate human techniques. Rumors began circulating throughout the galaxy, stories of a brave human who had transformed a space station crisis into a triumph of improvisation. Back on Earth, the human technician went about her daily work, blissfully unaware of her newfound fame. For her, it was just another job, another day of fixing problems and finding solutions. Little did she know, her hairpin and duct tape improvisation had inspired a paradigm shift among some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. And somewhere out in the stars, in Federation facilities, engineers and technicians were now stocking up on coffee, hairpins, and duct tape, not just as tools, but as symbols of a new era in intergalactic engineering.